this year's Robert Tyrie Benton Lecture. I thought I'd start by just telling you a little bit about the history of the Benton Lecture. This is one of probably the college's oldest and most prestigious lecture series. It's been in existence since after World War II. As you may know, the Benton family has quite a tradition with the College of Engineering. The first Dean of Engineering was John Benton. Dean Benton served up until 1930. The lecture series is actually named after his son, who was killed in World War II. It was generously endowed by his mother, who was Dean Benton's wife. And I'm so pleased that we have a number of the Benton family here today. If you all could just stand up and be acknowledged, we'd like to thank you for your... It's great that the family continues its relationship with the College of Engineering. We're so glad to have you here today. Over the years, we have used the Benton Lecture to bring a number of distinguished visitors to the College of Engineering at the University of Florida. We've even had a few non-engineers in the mix. I think Ambassador Andrew Young once gave this lecture for the college. But over the last few years, we've been using this lecture series to bring leaders to campus, people whose careers and personal philosophy and values reflect the characteristics that we want to emulate and promote in our college. And I'm very delighted to say that today's speaker continues that tradition of excellence and leadership. Our Benton Lecture for 2013 is Mr. Paul Brown. Paul is a senior executive with International Paper, which is the world's largest paper and packaging company with operations in 25 countries. And from the sound of it, I think Paul's probably worked in all 25 of those countries. But he is currently based in New York City. He joined International Paper in 1984. During his career with the company, he has held various engineering, manufacturing, sales, supply chain, and general management positions in paper and packaging in the United States, Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and Asia. His most recent position is President, International Paper India, and also Executive Chairman and CEO of Andhra Pradesh Paper Mills, a publicly traded Indian company based in Hyderabad, India. Prior to his position in India, Paul was President, International Paper Asia in Shanghai, China. He also served as Vice Chairman of the IP Sun Paper Joint Venture in China and Chairman of the IP Goldhawk Joint Venture in Beijing. In prior years, Paul served as Vice President and General Manager of International Paper's packaging business in Europe, the Middle East, and Africa, as well as Vice Chairman of Olmuksa, I hope I didn't butcher that name too much, a publicly traded Turkish company based in Istanbul, Turkey, and also as Chairman of the Moroccan Company of Boxes and Papers based in Casablanca, Morocco. Pretty exotic places Paul has lived in his career. All of this started, though, here at the University of Florida in Gainesville, Florida, where Paul earned his BS in Industrial and Systems Engineering with honors in 1984 and an MBA from Drexel University then in 1989. During his undergraduate years, this tradition of leadership actually began. He served as president of Tau Beta Pi, president of Alpha Pi Mu, and a student representative on the Dean of the College of Engineering's Advisory Council. Paul is married to another Gator, Heidi Ann Brown, who will also be doing double duty as a AV assistant today. So Heidi got her bachelor's in ISC in 1983, and they have two children, Hannah and Nate. We're delighted that Heidi could be here today, because we need someone to operate the AV, of course, but we're also delighted that Paul was able to bring his father and his brother, John Brown, and his brother Jeff. So welcome to the Brown family. Please, thank you for being here. Clearly, Paul's had an extraordinary career, but I can tell you from my own personal interactions, he is also an extraordinary individual, and I'm so grateful that he is here today to speak to all of you. He, in my mind, is the embodiment of what the Benton Lecture Series is all about. So please join me in welcoming Paul Brown.
Wow, I didn't know I was so impressive, but that's... Thank you so much for that, Dean. Good afternoon, students and professors and guests. I'm happy to be spending time with you today. I want to thank Dean Abernathy and Dr. Joe Hartman for inviting me to speak, and also to Dr. John Benton and his family for making this lecture series possible. I'm so happy to be here with you today at this great university, the place where I earned my engineering degree in 1984. You know, in 1984 doesn't seem that long ago, But as I look at you and hear about all the things going on, I feel a bit like a dinosaur 30 years later. I met with Dean Abernathy a few days ago in New York. In fact, we had a nice dinner, and we actually went to see the New York Nets play a basketball game. It was fun. And it was really encouraging to hear about all the exciting things happening in the College of Engineering. I hope you're proud to be part of the University of Florida. I'm a Bull Gator, actually, and very proud of the university, and I hope you are as well. Before I start, I want to spend just a couple more minutes reintroducing my family. First, I want to introduce my father, and he was already introduced, but my father is an 84-year-old in good health and full of energy. He's a retired professional engineer, an environmental engineer, and I'm also proud to say that he's a 30-year veteran of the United States military, with service first in the United States Navy assigned to the USS Kearsarge, which was an aircraft carrier patrolling the seas of the world, and then was a United States Air Force officer for the majority of his career, representing our country in a multitude of assignments. So I'm very proud of my father. Next, I also want to recognize my brother Jeff, the youngest of my siblings. He's a Florida Gator as well. He's got a BA in liberal arts from Florida and also a JD from the UF Law School. Jeff now works for the Florida Bar Association, helping to prosecute attorneys that run afoul of their sworn duties, and nothing sounds more fun than prosecuting attorneys. When you're a corporate guy like me, that sounds really attractive. My dad and my brother both live in Tallahassee, offering that city a bit of civilization and a touch of class in a city dominated by politicians and Florida State Seminoles. I also want to introduce my wife Heidi again. Heidi and I have been married for 29 years. And I like to say 28 of those years were really good. She says, which year was bad? I said, no, it was like 365 bad days, so I'm joking. She's a wonderful wife, and we actually met in Weill Hall in 1982, if you can believe that. And Heidi had a very interesting career herself after receiving her engineering degree from Florida. She worked first for General Electric, RCA Broadcasts, GE Aerospace, and GE Supply, different units of General Electric. And then she worked for Chrysler Pentastar Electronics, working on things as exotic as the M1A1 Abrams battle tank. Really proud of my wife for that. And Heidi retired from Chrysler when we had our first child in 1993, and she decided to become a full-time stay-at-home mom, and has been ever since. And I simply could have not asked for a better wife and better mother to our kids than my wife Heidi. We do have two terrific kids. Our daughter Hannah, who's 20 years old yesterday, turned 20. She's no longer a teenager, and she has been reminding us of that. She's in her second year at the University of Pennsylvania, Penn, in Philadelphia. And we have a son, Nate, who's a 17-year-old, and he's a junior in high school at the Dwight School in Manhattan, where we live. A quick note, well, no, I'm going to skip that. Never mind. My primary mission today is to share practical advice about life and career. This is not a technical talk. I know you're all very disappointed in that. But I want to talk about life and career. And I certainly don't claim to be an expert in either life or career. But I believe I've learned a lot since I graduated from the University of Florida 30 years ago. And I have a strong desire to share what I have learned. My comments today are simply my opinions, and you may agree or disagree. I hope some of them are a little bit provocative and against the grain. And I surely hope you'll listen and ask questions at the end of my talk. I always, whenever I sit in an audience, I want to know, how long is this presentation going to be and how many slides do you have? I have 11 slides, so it's not hundreds of slides. And it's going to be about 40 minutes. So I think it was scheduled for 90. It's only going to be 40. So I'm giving you back 50 minutes of your time. One other thing I want you to know about me, and I'll let you know right off the bat, that I had a really nice 30-year career with International Paper. I'm 51 years old. But my career has come to an end, not because of my own making. It's because I'm battling stage 4 colorectal cancer. And I'm currently a cancer patient at Memorial Sloan Kettering in New York City. And that's the reason I left my company, and I relocated from India back to New York. And darn it, the stage 4 metastatic cancer is incurable and inoperable. So, you know what? That's the way things go. But you know what? I'm happy, and I'm making the most of every day, and I'm really, really happy to be here to share my thoughts with you. I want to start today by talking a little about my career and my life after I graduated from UF. And I want to give you some perspective how I used my engineering degree to build a really good career. Next, I want to talk about important lessons that I've learned in life and job. And included in that is some thoughts about working abroad. I suspect some of you are interested in working abroad, getting international experience. It's something I have a lot of, and I can give you my perspective on that. And then finally, I'll finish by sharing some important opinions I have, or I don't know how important they are, but they're opinions, about leadership and what it takes to be a successful leader. So I'll begin telling you a little bit about my background, and Cammie's covered some of this, but I'll go into some more detail. I grew up as a military brat, moving from posting to posting with my very large family. It's an interesting and exciting life. How many of you are military brats? Any of you? So you probably know what I'm going to talk about, but we moved a lot when I was a child. It's an interesting and exciting lifestyle, and it gave me the opportunity to live in various parts of the United States, from California to Florida, and several places in between, and also in Asia and in Europe as a kid. We moved to Japan when I was a young child, born in Fort Walton Beach, Florida, so I am a Floridian. And so we moved to Japan, and then I also lived in Germany when I was in middle school, so I went to middle school in Germany. There are pros and cons to moving a lot as a kid, and maybe some of you military brats can relate to this. The pros being you have the sense of adventure as you move from place to place, especially the international assignments. And specifically because my parents made sure that we saw and experienced the local sites and traditions. And the cons, there are bad things about it, being the lack of opportunity to form long-term friendships and relationships, and you don't really have a hometown. You know, I've lived in 7 different places by the time I got to high school, and I was always flummoxed and unsure what to say when people asked me that dreaded question, where are you from? I never really knew what to say. So I've always said Florida, and I'm nominally a Floridian, even though I haven't lived here a whole lot in my life. This slide shows the places I've lived in the United States, the red dots, in both my growing up and in my work career. So you can see I've lived in a lot of different places. We currently live in Manhattan, as I mentioned, but we also have a home in Las Vegas, good place. And we also have a home on an island off the coast of Maine. And so we spend time in Las Vegas, Maine, and Manhattan. I'm sure many of you have had the same experience. And as I look back on it, I kind of look back on moving around a lot as a kid with mixed emotions. But for me, on balance, it was a net positive. And the good news for me is that my lack of roots instilled a strong sense of wanting to see things and go places, which I continued for the rest of my career. And in my career, I've certainly done that. And I'd also like to say my wife, Heidi, has a very similar background. Her father was a 30-year career military officer in the United States Army. And she lived in Okinawa the same time I lived in Japan, and she lived in Germany when I lived in Germany as a kid. We never knew each other, but we have a lot of similar backgrounds, so we have a lot in common, and that certainly helped those good 28 years. I'm sorry to say, however, that I attended this is going to be a little negative, but I'm sorry to say I attended a supposedly great high school, but it was actually a dreadful high school in Central Florida, in the Orlando area. I won't say which one, because probably most of them are dreadful. It's a high school where the only people more apathetic and undisciplined than the students were the teachers. And like a lot of high schools at the time in the 1970s, and maybe today, I hope not, there seemed to be excessive focus on high school sports and coddling popular kids than preparing students for college. That's my editorial comment. Gainesville was the obvious destination after high school, since UF is clearly the best university in the state. And at the time, it was the target in-state school for the best students in Florida high schools. Come to think of it, I'm not sure how I got into UF. Now that I think about it, I wasn't a great high school student, and my SAT scores were good but not great. I suppose I should have gone to FSU. Fact is, I was woefully unprepared for leaving home and going away to college, both academically and socially. But I entered UF in 1979, and for those of you, do we have any Gator football fans here? A few? Okay. For those of you that mark time by references to Gator football history, you may not be aware that in 1979 we still had wooden bleachers in the north end zone. It wasn't all closed in like it is today. The football field was artificial turf. The stadium was known solely as Florida Field, not Ben Hill Griffin Stadium or the Swamp. And Florida had never won an SEC title. Chris Collinsworth, some of you know who Chris Collinsworth is, I hope. He was a junior wide receiver and probably the best player on the team. In my freshman year, 1979, the Gators had the dubious distinction of going winless. Imagine going to this, and the stadium was only half full, but we were winless in 1979. We did tie a game, however, so our record was 0-10-1. The tie coming in the second game with Georgia Tech, the rambling wreck of Georgia Tech, who had an assistant coach on their staff, the quarterback's coach, whose name was Steve Spurrier. So Steve Spurrier coached at Georgia Tech the year that Florida tied them in 1979, the old ball coach himself. Our football coach in 1979 was in his first year at UF, a wonderful man named Charlie Pell. Does anybody remember Charlie Pell? Who started the season with considerable optimism and support. The unofficial slogan that year was, and if you excuse me, "Give 'em hell, Charlie Pell," and that's what everybody chanted. But by the end of the winless season, I'm sorry to say, many Gator fans, mostly students, were shamefully chanting, "Go to hell, Charlie Pell," at the end of losing football games. So it was quite a season. The next year, I'll say, the Gators had one of the biggest turnarounds in NCAA history. Went 8-4, went 8-4 the next year, and went to a bowl game. And I think they won the bowl game. So, and a few years later, Steve Spurrier came, and the rest is history. I began college by declaring my major as engineering, but I wasn't sure if I wanted to be an electrical engineer or a civil engineer. And so I took all the same pre-engineering classes you probably take today, calculus, physics, chemistry, all those things, in a huge lecture hall in a place we called GPA. Do you still call it GPA? No? Is it? You know what I'm talking about? GPA? And then there was GPB, and so 500 kids learning physics together. It was terrific. I also took some business classes and eventually decided to major in industrial and systems engineering because it seemed to me to be a great combination of a practical engineering core plus a healthy dose of what makes business tick. In fact, I became more and more interested in business as time went on, and I found the ISE program to be well suited to my interests. Dr. Jack Elzinga was the department chairman, and some of my favorite professors were Luis Martin Vega and Dr. Burns, and so some of those folks I think are still around. I took all the core engineering classes. I think you still do this today: statics, dynamics, thermo, engineering materials, differential equations. Really fun courses. And the core ISE curriculum focused on operations research, a lot of linear algebra, engineering economy, decision theory, statistics, and so on. These ISE courses, though, really interested me and seem to have practical application in the business world, and they really do. They really do. While in the ISE program, I got involved in a lot of activities, and Dean Abernathy touched on some of that. I was in IIE, Alpha Pi Mu, Tau Beta Pi, the Dean's Academic Advisory Council. I also worked for Professor Luis Martin Vega as a student assistant. I did an engineering internship at the Naval Air Rework Facility in Jacksonville at NAS-JAX, Naval Air Station Jacksonville. It was really cool seeing Navy fighter jets in dry dock being repaired and reworked. So I got involved in a lot of things besides my classes and besides academics. I was in a social fraternity, and I did all that kind of stuff. I only say this because one of the lessons I wanted to emphasize to all of you students that you really should take full advantage of all the university has to offer, not just the great classes, but all the organizations, whether there's social clubs or academic clubs or honor societies. It's really important to get involved, and better yet, take the opportunity to lead. If you have an opportunity in IIE or Alpha Pi Mu or Tau Beta Pi or any of these great organizations, run for office. Try to become the president, be the vice president, be the treasurer. These are great opportunities to prepare you for leadership roles in your career. They give you chances to speak publicly, build confidence, develop your leadership style, and spend extra time with higher authority. And who doesn't want that? You get to spend more time with your professors and your department chairs and with the dean. And it's worth it, believe me. And in a university as big as the University of Florida, how many students do we have here now? 50,000? And as in a college as big as the College of Engineering, it's important to figure out ways to stand out. And prospective employers are looking for prospective employees that stand out. The years went by quickly in Gainesville, and I graduated in 1984. Job market was pretty healthy then. I had multiple job offers in hand, IBM, Arthur Andersen, that was the predecessor to Accenture. I know Zadie knows all about that. Boeing, and International Paper. And of course I chose the high-tech paper route. But I did choose International Paper. And I went to work at the Research and Development Laboratory in Princeton, New Jersey, making $26,000 a year. And that was on the higher end of starting salaries at the time. Plus, I got my own office, and that was actually more important than the salary. I thought that was cool. So I was in high cotton working for International Paper in Princeton, New Jersey. And I should also tell you that I ended up working as the dean related for International Paper my entire career. That probably makes me a dinosaur based on the new normal where people seem to change companies more often. My company's headquarters is in Memphis, Tennessee, and it's by far the largest paper and packaging company in the world. It's a hard hat industry. We employ 70,000 people in 25 countries, and we have about $30 billion in sales. It's truly an international company. We have substantive presence, really the largest forest products business in all the BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, Indonesia, and Turkey, BRICS. And with the exception of Indonesia. We have business in Indonesia, but we're not the largest market share. Paper making and packaging doesn't sound that exciting, but I can tell you it's a lot more exciting than it sounds. It is a hard hat industry. It's extremely capital intensive. You know, we spend billions of dollars on capital equipment each year. It's full of engineers of all type, a lot of chemical engineers, a lot of mechanical, a lot of civil, but also a lot of industrial engineers. And we are obsessed with optimization and operational efficiency. We run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and you simply don't take paper machines down. You run them continuously, and you never stop. So you have to be very focused on energy efficiency. We're maniacal about safety and safety performance. That comes first and foremost, and we're also very, very focused on being a good corporate citizen. It's a terrific company. If any of you are interested in a great hard hat industry, send me your resumes and I'll see what I can do. My first job out of college was as a staff engineer for a division technical staff in Princeton, New Jersey. I quickly became very involved though in environmental affairs. And that really had nothing to do with my ISE education, but I spent most of my time managing environmental compliance for a large division of the company. And one quick aside I remember about working there was in environmental projects. Yesterday when I was flying down from New York's LaGuardia Airport, you go through the labyrinth of security procedures. We all know how that is and how frustrating it is. But back in 1985, I was working on a project at a paper mill in the southeast United States. And one of my first assignments was working at this mill. And my boss asked me to bring a sizable treated wastewater sample, an effluent sample, back to the laboratory in Princeton. So I was in the South in Alabama. And so I thought, how am I going to collect this effluent sample? So I went to the equivalent of a Walmart, and I bought one of those metal gasoline cans, that says gasoline in red and yellow and has the skull and crossbones danger, and collected my sample, went to the airport, checked in, sat in the waiting room, got on the airplane, flew home, and no one said a word about me carrying this gasoline can. A little different today. It's a call to the SWAT team for sure. So anyway, I was promoted to a management position after a year on the job. And I was a little cocky, a little too sure of myself, and frankly, I was a bit of a jerk. I hope that's worn off by now. But remember, I was only 23 years old, but I was always rising. I was already rising in the company, and that was heady stuff for me. I had older engineers reporting to me. And I was quickly faced with my first personnel issue. There was a weak performing engineer. He was about 5 years older than me, and I had to fire him. It just wasn't going to work out, so I had to fire him. And let me tell you that in your careers ahead, you'll be faced with many wonderful and happy times and a few stressful and unhappy times. And you will hire many people, I'm sure. I've hired hundreds of people over the years, but you'll probably have to fire a few. And firing a person much older than me when I was 23 years old really jolted me into understanding for the first time what managing and leading people was all about. It was a traumatic and sad experience, not only for the person I fired, but for me as well. And I became a lot less cocky, a lot less sure of myself, and much less of a jerk. You see, I realized for the first time that with great authority comes great responsibility. And that as a manager and leader of people, you are responsible for ensuring that the people you're leading never get to the point where you have to fire them. Your job is to develop and grow people and keep them from failing. Of course, there are limits to this, for sure. But ever since then, I've considered at least partially my fault whenever I've had to let someone go. The years progressed. Heidi and I found time to earn MBAs at Drexel University in Philadelphia, where we concentrated on financial management. Continued to gain further responsibility in purely technical roles. Was promoted at age 27 to be a manufacturing manager at a large production facility in Alabama. And the toughest job by far in my 30-year career was being a manufacturing manager at an industrial facility. It's a seemingly endless treadmill of issues and problems to deal with in a factory running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Fortunately, I did pretty well, and after 2 years, my company gave me an opportunity to grow and develop in a completely different role, making me a sales manager for the same business. Now, I knew nothing about sales. I was a technical person. But I quickly learned that being a sales manager is all about problem solving, understanding product pricing and profitability, leading people, and understanding what customers want. I learned also that some customers are better than others. And when you get into business, you know, not all customers are equal. Some are better than others for sure. And you want to direct company resources towards the best customers, the ones that are willing to pay a fair price for the value they receive from your goods and services. And I think that's one of the most important concepts in running a successful business. Devote your resources to people that are willing to pay a fair price and give you for the value you give them. I can also say that managing a sales organization is a lot more fun and less stressful than the daily grind of manufacturing or mill management. And some of you students may have an interest in technical sales. I know the ISE program has the sales engineer organization, and I think that's a great way to go for certain people. You know, it's not all about schmoozing customers. It's really about a highly technical job. You know, if you're working for a chemical company or even, you know, some of the grades of paper and packaging we sell are highly technical. And I believe eventually leading to a sales management role, I strongly believe that the best sales managers in large organizations come from an engineering background because, you know, our ability as engineers to understand numbers, analyze data, solve problems, all these things are exactly what a sales manager does day to day. And furthermore, if you look at senior-most levels in a lot of companies, it's really good to have that market experience, that sales experience. It's a badge of honor. You know, when you're up against a bunch of engineers that have never talked to a customer, but you've actually been a sales manager dealing with customers day to day, it's very powerful. It gives you a leg up. After a couple years in sales, I was promoted to my first general management role, and over the following years received increasing responsibility for multiple facilities, then more facilities, and eventually I changed to a completely different sector of my company. More relocation, more personal and family upheaval, but also more financial rewards, more career experience, and even more opportunity to grow and develop. So eventually my company decided that I need to get an experience in a staff role, so I went back to corporate headquarters. I ran a very, very large scale. I was telling Joe about business process redesign for the entire company, standardized business processes, and then enabling it with SAP. It's a project, at one point I think we had 800 people dedicated full-time to working on it for what essentially turned out to be a full-bore business process redesign, SAP implementation across the world for my company. I thought this was pure drudgery. And after 2 years, although I learned a lot about IT, about SAP, about business processes, I was able to go back into the line organization with responsibility for 14 factories in the Midwest of the United States. Things turned out well. And after a few more years, I was asked to relocate to Paris as operations manager for European packaging operations. And if you go overseas, Paris is a good place to go. And then things got even better. Shortly after that, I was made a corporate officer and vice president in my company. And you may or not know what that means, but typically in big corporations, we have 70,000 employees, and we have between 50 and 60 officers of the company. So it's a relatively narrow group, and it's really the senior leadership of the company. In Europe, I had responsibility for 30 factories and a business of about $1.2 billion in sales, with factories in Europe, Middle East, and Africa. Really good places: Italy, France, Spain, Morocco, Turkey, so on and so forth. My time in Europe also gave me my first taste of corporate governance. This is something you don't touch that much in the U.S. in companies, but as the dean related, I was the vice chairman of a Turkish public company. I was the chairman of a Moroccan public company. I was chairman of a smaller French company in Lyon, France. All of these companies that my company had ownership stake in, usually majority ownership, and then I was the chief executive and chairman of those companies. So it was a really good experience, and was a little out of the mainstream of what you might do here in the U.S. But my time in Europe also thrust me into the world of mergers and acquisitions, and this is something you read about a lot. Became in looking at or actually acquiring businesses in Morocco, France, Russia, several Eastern European countries, and also divesting businesses, actually selling businesses that we decided to part ways with in Ireland and in England. M&A is an interesting field, and again, I believe it's another area. It's a niche, really, where you can put your engineering talent to good use. M&A is all about first quantitative and qualitative analysis of a company's value, which many times is a function of the capital assets in place and the potential for growth. Financial analysis, in other words, how does this prospective company, prospective acquisition make money? Financing analysis, how are we going to fund this deal through debt or equity, or how are we going to do it? And finally, due diligence, which means teams of engineers and business types who physically look at financials, facilities, management talent, real estate, permits, capital equipment, verifying that what you think you're going to buy is what you're actually buying. So I think that's a really good field where engineers, in particular ISEs, can excel. After 5 years in Paris, and then I moved to Brussels with our family, I was promoted to president of International Paper Asia, relocated to Shanghai, China. We actually had 5 businesses in Asia at the time, and I was responsible for 10,000 employees, $2 billion in sales. And our business in Asia included factories and offices in China, Korea, Japan, Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam, and Taiwan. And once again, I served as vice chairman of a $1 billion joint venture with a Chinese company based in Shandong province, north of Beijing in China, and of another Chinese joint venture in Beijing. Slide. My years in China were outstanding. Here's a photo of me talking to the provincial Communist Party officials. And I can tell you that after the U.S., my favorite country is to live and work in is China. It's a wonderful, wonderful place. Anybody here from China? Is it wonderful? It's wonderful, yes. And we would return in a heartbeat, given the chance, to Shanghai. The Chinese have a wonderful culture. The people are smart and hardworking. Are you smart and hardworking? Yes. And Chinese people are very fun to be with, and China's economy is growing at 6 to 10% a year. That's pretty good too for business. I gained significant business experience there. We did a multi-$100 million expansion of our largest business. We acquired a European packaging company. I interacted frequently with party officials, which was always very interesting. And all the while, our business was growing at double digits a year. It was a great time. I recommend to each of you, go to China. Go to China. Figure out a way to go to China. It's up and coming. It's an up and coming place. See what's happening there. Get a job there if you can. A lot of young people. You go to places like Shanghai and Beijing and Guangzhou. It's full of young Westerners, and it's tremendously fun. You'll be amazed at what a terrific country it is to live and work in. While in Shanghai, I also worked on business development in other parts of Asia, including my company's eventual acquisition of a large publicly owned paper company in India. The first significant entry into by a foreign company into India's forest products sector. Next slide. Here's some pictures of me in India. The reason I mention this is after leading the acquisition and as a primary champion of this $600 million deal we did, I was asked to relocate to India and run the company that I had led the acquisition on. So be careful what you ask for. So I had to leave my beloved China and move to India, which is also a wonderful place in many ways. So the family and I picked up and left Shanghai. We moved to Hyderabad, India. I was the president of International Paper India. I was also the CEO and executive chairman of Andhra Pradesh Paper Mills, which Cami talked about. It was and still is a publicly traded company, 25% public ownership. So I was actually operating a public company with significant public ownership. Very difficult, very challenging in India. It's a terrific experience, but India is full of very difficult securities regulations for public companies, an immense government bureaucracy, a very different work culture. Anyone here from India? India? It's a very different culture, yes? What city are you from?
I'm from Mumbai.
Mumbai, yeah. It's a different place. And my family and I lived in Hyderabad. Just to give you a taste, Hyderabad is in the southern Indian state of Andhra Pradesh, right? It's a little bigger than Colorado. So imagine a place as big as Colorado. The difference is Colorado has 5 million people. Andhra Pradesh has 90 million people. It's a crowded place. But it's an exotic and interesting place as well. It's a difficult place to operate a company, though, and it's a little bit difficult for Westerners to live and work there, much different from China. But it's fascinating and it's full of opportunities for U.S. companies. And like China, I urge you to go to India. It's also up and coming. Understand the country and get a job there if you can, although it's difficult to get a job there. I'll tell you why in a minute. The size of the population and the trajectory of its development mean business opportunity that no U.S. company can ignore. You know, since I'm talking about international business experience, I want to share my thoughts on working abroad. Joe Hartman tells me this is a topic many of you are interested in. And as the world has become flatter and the business world, like a lot of things, has become globally interconnected, it certainly is an important topic. As I mentioned before, I've been blessed with multiple opportunities to live abroad and work abroad, and in my case, to lead very large businesses in different cultures. It's great to live and work many time zones away from the corporate headquarters. That's one of the best things. Although I can truthfully say that I've answered my mobile phone many times in the middle of the night in places like India and China with calls from people in the U.S. who did not seem to understand the concept of time zones. It happens all the time. It's unbelievable. You know, when you're 12 hours time difference, you're asleep when they're working, and that's actually a pretty good thing sometimes. Being an expat and working abroad is not for everyone, but for me it was immensely satisfying work and life experience. Rich with cultural and business learning, my experiences working abroad were the best times of my career. Many of you will end up working in companies or organizations that operate globally, and for those of you that aspire to senior management, if you really want to rise high in an organization, a corporation, for example, it's not only a but it's a really must-have. And most companies like mine, for our senior-most managers, we require it as a work experience. And so, having said all this, be aware that companies are pretty stingy in creating expat assignments. Fact is that employing a U.S. citizen abroad can cost 2 to 3 times as much as it costs to employ them in the United States. And it's not always a slam dunk that you'll get a work permit. You know, in India, for example, you need to prove that there is no qualified Indian citizen that can do the job you are slated for. So it can make it hard. And in my case, as a senior executive, I went on a fiduciary basis. I was there to protect the company's interest as the president of the company. You either have to have a special skill, a fiduciary responsibility, but by and large, it's hard for newly graduated undergraduates to just pick up and move anywhere in the world. It's not impossible, but it's hard. But if you want to work abroad in time, make sure your company, your employer is aware of it. Talk about it frequently, not too frequently, but frequently enough. Remind your bosses that you would love to work overseas, and it eventually can and will happen. That's the way I did it, because I always dreamed of working overseas, and it took a number of years, but it finally worked out. An overseas assignment, you'll be challenged and you'll learn a great deal and you'll have unique and bizarre experiences. When I worked in Europe, for example, this was my lead team in Europe. It included managers from 10 different European countries. This was 10 different languages. This was 10 different cultures. And people mistakenly like to think of Europe as a homogeneous place. It's not. The culture of Finland is much different from Ireland and Italy and France. And so it can be really challenging to work with people that have different languages and different cultural norms, and you really have to test for understanding. You have to be patient. Things move much more slowly. And as really the sole American in the group, with some language skills, decent language skills, but not perfect, it could be really challenging. Another example I'll share about living abroad and some of the unique things you run into. This happened in an unnamed country, which I choose not to mention, but I had to deal with an employee fatality, an employee who was killed in an industrial accident. In the United States, when that happens in a factory, it's handled with intensity and speed and all hands on deck like no other issue you will have to deal with. But it happens in the workplace. And I hope you never have to deal with it. I've actually had to deal with it a couple times, and it's tragic. In this particular country, though, I'm talking about, we had this employee that was killed, and the attitude of the country manager, who was a local national, his first response was, "It was meant to be. It is God's will. Don't worry about it." Imagine that. You think I could tell that to the corporate office? No, I don't think so. Well, that country manager no longer works for us. And we have instilled a culture of safety and protection and the value of life of employees. But it's things you don't really think about. Things we take for granted in the United States. People will say, "Don't worry about it. It's not a big deal when somebody gets killed." Can you imagine? Crazy. Another odd situation in Finland. Excuse me, Dean, for this one, but while visiting a major supplier, my host decided our group of visitors, and we're all men, by the way, before I say this, we'd partake in a uniquely Finnish custom and take an extremely hot sauna. Maybe some of you have done this. Just unbelievable. It's like your skin's burning. You're unclothed. And then we marched through the forest, single file, this group of men, to a freezing lake where we skinny dipped as a group. This is a business meeting, by the way. It was my first time and my last time doing that. And I almost had a heart attack. When you go from the hot Finnish sauna to a lake with ice in it, it's really hard on the heart. Living and working overseas in far-off places also means that you go to a lot of business meetings with meals, dinners and lunches. I could, over my 30-year career, I'm not exaggerating, I've probably been to 2,500 business dinners. Is part of the job. But you need to develop a strong stomach when you're working overseas in exotic places. I have been served and eaten a variety of bug larvae, fried scorpions, duck feet, pig brains, mashed potatoes mixed with raw pig blood, raw chicken, raw pork, unpasteurized goat milk ice cream, moose milk blue cheese, baked pigeons, sautéed muskrat, a Chinese delicacy called hair and blood, fugu, the poisonous Japanese blowfish, I've had a lot of that, and sadly a lot of wild and feral and domesticated mammals, reptiles, and birds, which I choose not to name. It would probably upset many of you. And my favorite, which I copied off a menu, stir-fried pickled pepper and guts. This was at a fine restaurant in China. A final example of working internationally is when I visited a potential acquisition, a paper mill complex in Russia. And at 9:30 in the morning, I was face-to-face with my Russian host. Any Russians here? Okay. Yeah, Russian?
Not from Russia, but Russia.
Okay, all right. My Russian host was a bear of a man. He was the mill manager, which is really a big deal in the paper industry. And he wanted to test my manhood and my Americanism, my American stamina. So at 9:30 in the morning, bottle of Russian vodka. And we consumed the entire bottle. Something else that Gainesville taught me how to do. And then took a tour of his very dangerous industrial plant. An egregious violation of all safety policies held near and dear in my company. I could go on, but the point is in that working abroad, you'll be challenged by cultural and religious and social differences and bizarre situations that you will never ever experience in the United States. So take the opportunity if you can. And if you want to work abroad, I suggest that you don't go to England or Canada or Bermuda or some safe cozy assignment. Go to one of the BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, Indonesia, Turkey. That's where things are happening and where you will gain immense learning and value. Plus, it's more exciting. If you go abroad and you take your spouse and a family, like I did, your first priority you'll find is making sure they're comfortable and safe. It's harder on the family than the employee. You go to work every day, you're engaged. Your family is having to deal with the local culture on a much real-time basis than you are. And finally, in an expat assignment, you got to remember to achieve the proper work-life balance. See and experience all that you can while you're living overseas. Travel extensively. I sure did. My career, this is, I'm not bragging about this, but I've earned over 5 million frequent flyer miles in my career. I've traveled to over 70 countries. I've been to places like North Korea, Bosnia, Zimbabwe, Bangladesh, Lebanon, some shaky places. And it's a lot of fun. It can be scary at times, but it's also thrilling. So that's a little bit about my career. Thanks for indulging me on that. I've learned a lot over the years, and I wanted to just give you some ideas about things I hold dear and things I believe, some basic lessons. Number one, I really think it's important to find a healthy work-life balance, and it's key to a successful career. There is no need to be maniacal about your work ethic. You don't need to be a maniacal workaholic to be successful. I certainly focused on finding the right balance, and I've always been amused by work colleagues, who think they need to put in 60, 70, 80 hours a week to be successful. To me, that says they're having to work way too much to achieve what other people can achieve in much fewer hours. Sure, there will be times when you have to put in a lot of extra hours in certain episodes of your career, but I assure you it is neither healthy nor helpful for you to work yourself to death. And no one nearing the end of their life says, I sure wish I'd spent more time at the office, right? So I submit to you that your mental health and physical health, and therefore your ability to get more done at work, depends on how effective you are in creating a work-life balance that is generous to your family, yourself, and the pursuit of enjoyment and happiness. The message here is to work hard. Work very, very hard. I know you do here at school. But play hard too. And I know you do that here at school too. But enjoy your life each and every day. It's very important. And I have a certain perspective on that I'm happy to share. Another lesson I've learned is that when you work in a good organization, everyone is smart. It's like here at school, everybody's smart. And this can lead to serious bouts of self-doubt, right? And feelings of inadequacy. I don't know if this is all of you, but I think some of you probably feel this way. It's natural, and you have to remember that those same people that you hold in awe probably look at you and say, wow, I wish I was as smart as that person. And that happens in the workplace too, and people certainly feel they're not as capable as the next person. Feelings of inadequacy can also affect your ability in dealing with higher authority. People that feel inadequate tend to exhibit nervousness and lack of confidence, and these are things you don't want to exhibit in the workplace. There's a great article in the September 2005 edition of the Harvard Business Review. This is September 2005. And if you have these feelings of inadequacy, I'd urge you to read it. The article is called "The Dangers of Feeling Like a Fake." You appear normal on the outside, but inside you're a basket case of inadequacy, And I think many high achievers and work professionals in general appear perfectly normal on the outside, but they're intense feelings of inadequacy on the inside. I always did, myself, and I still do. It's okay, though, and I suggest all of us simply get over it. Have confidence. You are terrific. Otherwise, you'd be at Florida State University. Another good lesson I've learned is to accept that you will fail from time to time in your career. Don't be afraid to fail. I've been fortunate to work in an organization that allows people to fail and then pick themselves up, learn from their failure, and then places very high value on the person's ability to recover from failure. It's the recovery that's important, not the failure, it's the recovery. I know firsthand, in my first year as a corporate officer, I was running this large business in Europe, and for a multitude of reasons, the business did not perform to expectations in my first year. It was just awful. We put a lot of pressure on people in corporate America, and you're expected to get results. The results were good, they weren't great, they weren't as good as the previous year. But in the following 4 years, the business achieved record results year after year. So I recovered. And no one remembered my initial year of failure. What my bosses remembered and credited me for was the fact that I persevered and recovered from the initial failure and subsequently led the business to higher levels of performance in multiple years. Recovery from failure is key. Another important lesson I've learned is that you will be valued, and this is important, please listen carefully. You'll be valued not so much for your book learning and your technical degree as you will be for your ability to communicate, collaborate, and influence people. Believe me, very few of your work colleagues are going to care much about your engineering degree or where you went to college, except when you're talking about football, once you begin your career. Everyone assumes in the workplace that you know how to analyze and solve technical problems. That's why you got hired. And that you went to a good school. But people will praise you or discount you based on the soft skills that you possess. It's the soft skills that are important. Remember, these soft skills are critical. And I don't know if you've heard of Michael Hammer. He's one of these quality gurus. He talks about soft skills, and he always says, the soft stuff is the hard stuff. The soft stuff is the hard stuff. And I couldn't agree more. You simply will not be successful and happy in most organizations if you do not master the ability to communicate broadly and transparently, collaborate broadly and transparently, and influence people positively and enthusiastically. The soft stuff is the hard stuff. Another thing I believe is that it helps to have a healthy skepticism. And don't take things at face value. Ask questions not only to gain better understanding, but to demonstrate that you're engaged, you're curious, and you want deeper understanding about the issue at hand. One common trait I've found in very good leaders, very strong leaders, is that they challenge, they verify, and they are, that's my brother's cell phone. And they're constantly ensuring that they fully understand the issues and implications. Many people are satisfied just to sit back and listen and accept what they are told. Don't do that. I submit that you should always challenge, gently, positively, nicely, but challenge and verify the facts and test for consistency from multiple sources. Very important. Here's another thing I believe. I believe that women generally make better bosses than men. What do you think of that, women? This is really subjective. I think it's probably terribly politically incorrect, but it is, I don't really care. It's a personal preference, and I believe women are more thoughtful, more empathetic, more focused than men. I'm sorry, men. I'm a man. I know. But for my generation, remember I'm about 30 years older than you, most of you students. It's been uncommon for women to be in top leadership positions in a hard hat industry, although I've had 3 female bosses in my career. Times have changed, and more women are rising to senior management and board of directors roles in U.S. companies. I recently attended a dinner, the Catalyst organization. It's a organization that supports building opportunities for women in the workplace. And I attended the Catalyst Awards at the Waldorf Astoria, New York City, about a month ago, where Alcoa chairman and CEO Klaus Kleinfeld was a speaker. And if you want to study a company that is really creating opportunities for women, and a great company to work for is Alcoa. Even better than my company. We work really hard to create opportunities for women in leadership roles. But Alcoa is outstanding. And that's a hard hat industry as well, by the way. But still today, 2013, only about 25 out of Fortune 500 companies have women CEOs. So we have a long way to go, ladies. You know, another famous leader, Mao Zedong, proclaimed, what did he proclaim? Women hold up half the sky. And I certainly agree with Mao. I don't agree with Mao on a lot of things, but I agree with Mao on this point. And it's about time for you women engineers to use your hard hats to break the glass ceiling. Enough said. Another thing I believe is that America is, many of you are Americans in this group, I am. That's beside the point, but America is and will remain the one indispensable nation on the planet for a long time, certainly for the rest of your lifetimes. I believe that, despite all the hand-wringing in this country about the growing economic clout of other countries, the U.S. will remain ahead of these economic and geopolitical rivals for decades. No doubt that China's economy and eventually India's economy will become larger than the U.S. economy, but it helps when you have 1.3 billion people, you know, and it makes a difference. The leverage is tremendous in those populations. However, the U.S. has key fundamental advantages that will take a long time for other countries to match. First, the U.S. has an effective and robust rule of law and strong transparency and relative low corruption. Take a look at this slide from Transparency International. This shows the latest transparency rankings across the globe. This was done in 2012. The yellow colors indicate countries with relatively high transparency or low corruption. That's the yellow. That's 2 strikes, brother. So yellow is low corruption, and the red color is the opposite. And the darker the red, the bigger the corruption. Interesting chart, huh? Countries simply will not be able to compete on a global basis across multiple industries unless they can demonstrate transparency and sound business ethics. One highly effective U.S. law, you may or may not be familiar with this, but a highly effective U.S. law that helps guide U.S. companies' behavior in foreign countries is the United States Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. You'll get to know this very well. It's called FCPA, Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. It prohibits payoffs and bribes to officials of foreign governments and ensures severe criminal and civil penalties if violations occur. A lot of companies have gotten in trouble with this. This means that when you're a manager involved in a U.S.-listed business operating in a foreign country, you're legally liable for violations of U.S. anti-corruption law, as well as the local laws in the country in which you're operating. Few countries have similar anti-corruption laws, Britain notably similar to the U.S. in that regard. And it helps that U.S. companies will operate in a legal and ethical manner. Another reason the U.S. will continue to lead is what I believe to be the inherent entrepreneurialism and innovation that's inherent in American culture and in American business and American academic institutions. Another reason is many of our economic rivals, many developing nations, have huge social and environmental issues to deal with, things that we solved 50 years ago. And even though we can do better environmentally. Take a look at this picture, recent picture from Beijing. This is taken a short while ago in the city of Beijing, one of the great cities of the world. And I love China. No one loves China more than me. But can you imagine growing up not being able to see the blue sky? You know, so the government in Beijing and the government in China, unfortunately there's a new leader, Xi Jinping, the new leader of China, who I think is going to do some good things. But China has so many people it has to create jobs for. And so industry runs amok. Coal is burned everywhere. Everybody has a car now, and this is the result. This is scary, you know. Compare this to New York City, where the sky is blue every day, you know. So it's a real challenge for China. But China is an amazing country, and they're going to figure it out. But they're not going to figure it out fast enough for all the kids that have to live with this kind of air pollution. When I lived in Shanghai, I worked on the 43rd floor, 53rd floor. I was really high up in the air. And there were days I could not see the building next to us because of the smog. It's unbelievable. So a lot of countries have environmental, social, all kinds of issues to deal with. Another U.S. advantage is access to superlative education, like the University of Florida. Other countries have great universities, there's no doubt. China has great universities. But I think we have greater universities in this country at the undergraduate and especially the graduate level. This even extends to engineering education, although there's a hand-wringing by politicians and the media in this country about the number of engineering students in the U.S. versus our chief economic rivals. I think the commonly stated numbers, Cam, you tell me if I'm wrong here, but I think China supposedly graduates 600,000 engineers a year, India 350,000, the United States about 70,000. Is that approximate? I agree, though, with an academic, Indian-American technology entrepreneur and academic named Vivek Wadhwa. He's associated with Duke University, and he argues, I think very in a compelling way, that the quality of American engineering students is superior to America's economic rivals' students, and that the graduating engineer numbers cited are not always apples to apples. What some countries will list as an engineer, such as an elevator repairman, that's listed as an engineer in some countries, and in this country we don't really do that. So I think it's really careful to watch that. I'm not sure if the dean agrees with me on this topic. I know you probably know. I know you know more about it than I do, but it's an interesting thing to look at. I'm personally not as worried about the number of engineers in this country as some people are. And I think my experience in working overseas, I've dealt with it firsthand. Engineers and elevator repairmen, and they're not the same. So my experience tends to support my point of view, I think. I do believe American engineers are amongst the best, if not the best, better educated. And I'll use the word trained that Joe doesn't like, with the possible exception, believe it or not, this is going to throw you for a loop, the best engineers I've ever worked with are French. French engineers are tremendous. They're analytical. They look to globally optimize every problem. Now, I'm not saying that any of it can be implemented, but the analysis is superb and superb. And I've worked with a lot of engineers from different countries. And I would tell you, if I had something that really needed a thorough analysis, I always gave it to a French engineer. What do you think of that? All said, I strongly believe, and I don't mean to be jingoistic here, but I believe the U.S. will remain the single indispensable country on this planet for decades to come. Another key learning that I want to share is that a lot of people entering the workforce think their career is going to go like this. And the reality is it goes more like this, the second chart. There's a lot of vertical movement, but there's really more horizontal movement, kind of growing and developing at the same level in different roles, different businesses, different projects, you name it. And the value is derived in that horizontal movement. That's where you're growing and developing. And so you think you're going to take off like a rocket, and yet you're moving sideways a lot of the time. Don't worry about it. It's that growing and developing that's important. Final key learning. And listen carefully to this too. It runs a little counterintuitive, but I think it's really, really important when you get into the workplace to hold your bosses accountable. Hold your bosses accountable. And that may sound strange because part of your boss's job is to hold you accountable. But it works in reverse too. The best boss I ever had, a woman my same age, believe it or not, told me a few years ago, hold me accountable. Tell me when I'm screwing up. And challenge me if you think I'm not being responsive or if I'm not providing the support you need. And she meant it. And I did hold her accountable. Not excessively, I had to be careful, or frequently, but on several occasions I demanded that she be a better boss, more supportive, more responsive, more reliable. It worked, and she grew and developed through my reverse coaching. What does it mean for you students? Professors, you're not going to like this. But I encourage you students, I urge you to have the courage to tell your professors when they are not connecting with you, when they are being elusive with their office hours and you're trying to meet with them, when they cover concepts that you and your classmates don't understand the first time. Remember, you or your parents, along with the taxpayers of the state of Florida, are paying for your education. And it's incumbent on you to demand that your professors teach and communicate in a way that you understand. and provide you the support and encouragement to learn the topic in the courses that you're paying for. You're paying for these courses. Now, of course, students, you have an equal, actually a greater responsibility. You need to be prepared, come to class on time, be prepared, and your professors need to hold you accountable for that too. Is that okay, Joe? Hold your bosses accountable. It may work better in the corporation than in the university, but you deserve nothing less. Have courage. Okay, I want to end my talk today by sharing just a few more ideas on leadership. I hope you know that companies and organizations place very high value on employees that demonstrate leadership, both leading a team or participating as a team member. It's not something we talk a lot about in American universities. When I was in college, I couldn't even spell leadership. But I tried to get involved in organizations and practice leadership skills. And it's critical to your career going forward that you develop a leadership style. You know, show charisma. Have some charisma. Don't be a shrinking violet, and figure out how to influence people in a positive way. Slide. Dwight Eisenhower, General Dwight D. Eisenhower. He was the 34th president of the United States, of course. And I really like this saying. He said, leadership is the art of getting someone else to do something you want done because he wants to do it. Make them think it's their idea, right? I could not agree more. And the trick, though, is how do you make this happen? First of all, I think the first, for my personal leadership style, I think it works great. It's also sort of how I am, I think. Be kind to people. Just be nice and care about people. Show that you care about them. It's simple. It's so simple to be nice. And people will gravitate towards you if you have a big heart. Just because you're the boss doesn't mean you have to be mean or tough. You can be nice, and it works very effectively. Especially important to engage people that are difficult or resistant to developing a positive working relationship. Many of you know Lou Holtz, the famous football coach. I couldn't stand the guy for years, but then I heard him speak a couple times. He came to our company and he talked about leadership. And he said, sometimes you need to care the most about people that deserve it the least. You ever heard that? And you'll find in the workplace you're trying to engage an employee and they just don't want to be engaged. And sometimes you get so frustrated, but you've got to try extra hard. Care the most about the people that deserve it the least. Now, there are limits to this. Lou Holtz is also the guy who said, motivation is simple. You eliminate those who aren't motivated. Works both ways. Second point about leadership is I think you do need to show charisma. Show some energy and have a presence. Dress well. It sounds superficial, but it's really important. Your appearance, the way you look. And I'm not saying I look good, but have immaculate hygiene. I know it sounds silly, but it's important. Look the part. Look like you're a leader. Look like you're a serious player. Have good manners. Simple, but a lot of people don't. Understand business etiquette. Understand how to eat at a fancy restaurant when you're at a business meal. Don't act silly. Don't ever act silly. It's hard, sometimes not to act silly. And never, ever allow yourself to be viewed as a gossiper or a politician. Don't be overly serious, though. I'm not saying you got to be rigidly serious. Find times to make things fun for your team. And remember, most importantly, when you're a leader, everyone is watching exactly what you do and how you behave and how you get along each day. Set an example for the entire team. Next point about leadership is you need to know your stuff. You can't skim over the facts when you are the boss, or anytime really. You need to study harder than ever when you're in charge and make sure that no one thinks you're a slacker. And you will encounter a few slacker bosses in your career. But the good news is they don't get far and they get weeded out eventually. Here's another one I think is really important. It's a little bit soft, but you really need to, in my opinion, be well-rounded. We look for people that are well-rounded. We want you to be strong technically, but we want you to be well-rounded and have a world view. Have an opinion. State your opinion. Argue your opinion. And demonstrate a broad range of interests, well beyond Gator football, Kim Kardashian, Jay-Z, Duck Dynasty, or Downton Abbey. Nothing wrong with any of those things. I love all of them. Maybe not Kim Kardashian, but actually I like all the rest of them. Go deeper and understand current events around the world. Study history. Understand public policy. What decisions are governments around the world making that will impact the public over the long term? What is the public policy around different parts of the world? Demonstrate a breadth and depth of understanding about a lot of disparate topics. Show you're well-rounded and show you belong. The next point goes without saying, you do a lot of this. Read. Read everything you can get your hands on, except business books. Don't read business books. They're crap. I will tell you, in my life, I've read less than 3 business books. One was Good to Great, and I forgot the other 2. Don't waste your time on business books, just my personal opinion. It's usually written by people who've never been in business. But read other things. Read novels, read historicals, histories, biographies. I know Joe likes to read biographies. Read different points of view. Challenge yourself to read material that contradicts your biases or political leanings. Don't waste your time on business books. But spend a lot of time on current events as well as novels. Here's a list of things I like to read. Okay, these, I think these are some of the greatest things in the world. I read these every day. New York Times, Washington Post, Gainesville Sun, Sydney Morning Herald. The great thing about reading an Australian newspaper is everybody loves Australia, right? Nobody hates Australia. And it's kind of interesting to get their point of view on world events. They're very neutral in their media about the Chinese and America, Russia and Western Europe. It's really online, it's free. Read the Sydney Morning Herald. The Times of London, Financial Times, much better paper than the Wall Street Journal, although Wall Street Journal is a great newspaper, but Financial Times is excellent. Slate, some of you may read Slate. Politico online, really good to keep up with what's going on in this country's politics. The Economist, probably the single best weekly you can read, in my opinion. And then The Week, which is a good summary of everything that happened in the prior week, if you didn't have a chance to read all the rest of these things. Close to the end here. A few more things about leadership. I come back to accountability. Hold people accountable. Make sure they have well-defined stretch goals and measure their progress frequently. Have frequent one-on-one discussions. One of the things you hear about this probably when you get in a corporation. I don't know if you hear about it much in college, but having a one-on-one conversation on a regular basis with your employee has been proven to shown it's the single best way to engage and motivate people. To sit down and have a private one-on-one discussion. Here's what you're doing well. Here's what you could improve. What can I do better? What am I doing well? And having an honest conversation. And I was talking to a boss one time about this, and her, some people say, I have one-on-ones all the time. We're always having one-on-ones. What is this one-on-one stuff? And Carol Roberts, one of our senior executives at IP, she would say, no, that's a water cooler conversation. A real one-on-one's like having a date. It's a lot more intimate. It's a lot more personal. So there's talking at the water cooler, and there's having a date. And you want to have a date with your employees in the sense that you want to connect with them in a very, think of the right word here. You want to connect with them in a very intense way. So another learning is have courage to do the right thing. This kind of goes without saying, but you got to do the right thing, even when it hurts. Don't allow yourself, and this is really important. I was talking to the dean about this earlier. You don't want to allow yourself to become an accomplice unintentionally to some wrongdoing or nefarious behavior. You always got to speak up and say, no, I'm not going to do that when your colleagues want to cut corners or demonstrate unsavory behavior. And you'll find yourself, you'll slip into this, and before you know it, you're an accomplice to something that's not right. I'm not talking about illegal behavior, but it can become illegal sometimes. And you've got to have those antennae up, because there are unethical people out there willing to do just about anything to get ahead. And this happens in companies. And you've got to be very quick to say, no way am I going to get involved in that. Don't ever give anyone doubts about your ethics, your honesty, or your trustworthiness. It's the fastest way to kill your career. And be very alert to situations where you can get sucked in unknowingly, and then you're an accomplice, and then you're in trouble. I've seen it happen to a lot of people. Be consistent. Be predictable. Have principles, stand by them. Don't make your colleagues guess about your intentions. There's nothing worse than having a boss who's unpredictable. You don't know how they're going to react. That's really poor leadership. You want to know exactly how your boss is going to react to something, because they operate on principles and they operate with a moral compass. And you ought to be able to read that and know exactly how they're going to react. If you get an unpredictable or impetuous boss, it's really awful. So as a leader, as a boss, you want to be consistent and predictable, and you want to be fair. You want to really look at both sides of a situation and make sure the people working with you believe you to be fair. It's very important. Another learning is recognize your colleagues. Say thank you, thank you, thank you. It's the simplest gift in the world to give, and people cherish being appreciated for their hard work with a heartfelt thank you. I'm amazed, however, how frequently people forget to say thank you and don't show common sense appreciation to those around them. Thank you. Thank you for having me here today. Finally, and here's my final point, when you're working in a corporation, an NGO, a government organization, wherever you are, don't take credit. Don't take credit for the good things that happen. Instead, shed all that credit and give it to your team. Give it to the people you work with. Credit them generously. You don't need to trumpet your success, but let your team have the success. Let your co-workers take the credit. Be humble. Be humble. And don't worry about not getting credit, because your bosses are smart. They know what you did. They know how you contributed. And they will admire you for the fact that you gave credit to others when obviously you should have gotten some credit yourself. Your bosses are smart, and you're smart too. And that concludes my thoughts for today. I thank you for your patience and attention, and I'm happy to take any questions. Yeah, sure. If anybody has any, yeah.
Questions?
Any questions? Anything I said that you disagree with?
Sure.
Yes, sir.
If you could sum it up into one thing, what would be truly the best way to measure good leadership?
Well, I think the most important thing about leadership is, do you have good character? Do people admire you because you do the right thing? You're honest, you're trustworthy, you're reliable, and you're fair. And I think those are really the elements of having a good character. You're going to find very few leaders who people admire or are good leaders if they don't have good character. So I would say it comes down to character. Being above reproach in everything you do. And you look at the great leaders in the history of this country or other countries, and generally that's what you'll find is people of character. Some people are huge fans of our current president, some are not, but I believe him to be a man of great character, whether I agree with his policies or not. And I think that's one of the reasons he's a great leader. May not like his policy all the time, but I think he's a great leader. So. Yes, sir.
Coming out of college, you clearly had great job aspects or prospects, but what did you look at when picking a job? Did you pick the paper company over, some of the world's most well-known companies?
You know what? My wife, also an ISE graduate, she graduated a year ahead of me, went to work for GE. We knew we were going to get married. This sounds really shallow, but her company was going to transfer to Philadelphia, so I looked for an opportunity in the Philadelphia area. So the whole reason I joined the paper industry was so I could be near my future bride. And so it was, there was no really, I remember IBM, I called IBM and told them I didn't want to come work for them because I was going to go with International Paper, and they said, International Paper? I said, IBM, so that was it, it was. But I will tell you, it's funny. Everything is always more interesting than it seems. People look at paper, it's been around for years and years, and we're really more of a packaging company than a paper company. But any industry you go, I don't think it matters. I really don't think it matters. If you pick the right company, independent of the sector, if you pick the right company, do a lot of research. I tell people, pick it and stick with it, because over time you'll have great opportunities, you'll have great leadership development, great training. I think of training we do at my company. Our chairman every year takes a group of people to the battlefield at Gettysburg. And we spend 3 days walking the battlefield, talking about the strategy from the North perspective and the South's perspective. These are great opportunities. And you'll find these in world-class companies like International Paper, Alcoa, Dow, Exxon, Disney, the list goes on and on. That's not for everybody, but whether it's paper, widgets, aluminum, steel, chemicals, I really don't think it matters that much. May disagree, but that's how I feel. Yes, sir?
Is there anything you would have done differently?
Oh, that's a great question. I wouldn't have gotten cancer. I would have had more kids. We have 2. I wish we had about 5. But I don't think I would have done anything differently, no. I have no regrets. Yes, ma'am.
How many languages do you speak?
Well, I speak quite a bit of German, a little French. I can order a lot of beer in Mandarin, a little Spanish. You know, when you work with people from other countries, you pick up a lot, so you can sort of, like in China, it's Chinglish, you know, it's English and Chinese, and but I'm not really fluent in multiple languages. Probably, I'm barely fluent in English, but German would probably be my best language besides English. It's really important though. Learn it. I mean, if you can, if you ever work in China, you know, people. I was telling the dean earlier, maybe Joe. I think it's easier to learn Mandarin than it is to learn French. I think it is. You know, French, you have all these conjugations, genders, tenses. Mandarin doesn't have any of that. They have intonations, which are difficult. And the Chinese characters are challenging, but the vocabulary and all that stuff. And Heidi speaks Mandarin very well. And do you agree with that?
I agree with learning Mandarin was easier, but it is definitely a language you have to practice. After being away from it for 2 years, I've forgotten a lot of it. But when I was using it every day, and when you're in the country and you go out and you have to speak it, because in the work environment, you're working with people who speak English, but on the street, people speak Chinese. And so I was speaking it every day, and I got to where I could have conversations with people in Chinese, and it was great. And I wish I had kept it up. In fact, that's one of the things I want to kind of work on this summer, is remembering it again. But yeah, it's important.
Yes, sir.
I know it's difficult to get a job internationally right out of college. So I was curious, like, do you have any advice on a way to jump into an international position out of college, or a way to bridge the gap before you're able to?
Yeah, it's hard. You know, one thing we do in my company, because we don't send a lot of young people, but we look at high potential talent, or what we call early identified people within their first 5 years of college. We call it early identified high potential. We create project opportunities for them overseas. And for example, when I was in India, I brought a high potential young employee over, a couple years out of college, who stayed there for 3 months and worked on a project for us. So a lot of companies will do that. That's one thing. Now, 3 months is that's a sip of coffee compared to, you want a whole jug of coffee. I think another best way to do it is the U.S. government, the Department of State, the CIA, places like that. If you want to work for the government, they are willing to take young people, especially in the foreign service. And if you go to embassies and consulates around the world, they're staffed with all kinds of young people like you guys who are there for 2-3 years. And they typically move from country to country for 5-6 years, then they come back to Washington, D.C., and then they go back out, and eventually they have opportunities at senior levels in the diplomatic corps. I think that's the best way to do it. The pay's not all that great, but the learnings are tremendous. See, we don't really have a need to take young engineers, because we can get them locally, and they're pretty good. And they're, in India, we pay engineers $7,000 a year, $10,000 a year. They're not. I may be understating that a little bit, but it's much, much less than you would pay to take you over and pay 3 times what you would earn here locally. So it's really an economic issue more than anything else. Sorry to say, because, I'll tell you, in my company of 70,000 employees, operations in 25 countries, we have less than 30 U.S. expats. And I was one of them for years and years, but it's so expensive, to put us overseas. It was $4 or $5 million a year for my company. It was a lot. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. Sorry.
I'm very happy you like Chinese China very much. Can you say something about China?
Absolutely. Because most of the paper industry in China is small village industries that dump their wastewater untreated into local streams, in Hunan province and Hubei and other places. It's changing though. The Chinese government over the last 3 years has shut down about $15 million of that capacity, 15 million tons of that capacity. And good companies like Sun Paper and International Paper and others invest hundreds of millions of dollars in wastewater treatment and other environmental controls that are the same here in the U.S. We consume a lot of natural resources, for sure. There's no doubt. It's like a lot of hard hat industries to make the products that people like, all of us use every day. But companies like ours and good corporate citizens plant a lot more trees than they harvest. They're meeting all the local and federal regulations for wastewater discharge and whatnot. But a lot of that smog you saw is industries like the paper industry, the old school paper industry in China. It's not from the newer, more modern mills. Yeah, but it's a good question. Han Hao. Yes?
A question. Do you think, how I phrase this, do you think your ISC background has impacted how far you've gotten? Do you think that if you had studied electrical engineering, would you have gotten this far, or do you think your character has really been the driving force?
Well, that's a great question. I don't know. I think the ISC curriculum, I think it's more, how should I say this? I think it's in a way it's a less technical, I think, than say EE or Chemie. You're working on things that are used in more of a business orientation than a technical orientation, whether it's optimization or all the linear algebra things you do, a lot of the programming you do. I think those are more business related. So I was interested in that. I used some of it in my career. If I'd been a EE, my sense is I probably would have ended up being much more technical. We have I find more ISEs sort of gravitate towards business leadership roles compared to chemies and EEs and MEs and certainly civil engineers. So I think it probably did help thrust me down that direction a little bit. Yeah. Anything else? Yes, ma'am. Zadie.
What advice do you have for people who are about to graduate and work for managers who are generations older than us and we have different views on the corporate world and our career trajectories and have different expectations in general?
Wow. Your boss makes a difference. And sadly, sometimes you end up with a bad boss. And if you don't see a way out, change companies. Your boss can make a huge impact. But one thing, I started to put this in one of the points, your boss is important, but more important than your boss is your boss's boss. And it's really important to get to know your boss's boss. They're really the one that impact your career more than your boss. They're making the decision about your next move. Now that doesn't answer your question, but gosh, I think bosses are smart. If you do a good job, work hard, it's so easy to get ahead. It is so easy. Just do a little extra work. Do a little extra. Stay an hour extra and do a little bit more than anybody else. And over time, it gets recognized. And people start to say, wow, Zadie, she is really doing a good job. She really smiles a lot. And I'm sorry, Zadie. And they start to talk about you behind your back. Wow, what are we going to do with her next? She's a great worker. And it's because you're doing it just a little bit more than anybody else. And it's not just your boss. In my company, when we move people, we have a people council concept. Your boss doesn't decide your career. It's a council of independent managers that say, wow, Zadie's been doing a great job in, part A of the company. Let's move her over to part B. That's a little more challenging. Let's see if she's really any good. And they do that. So do a little extra than anybody else, and then don't worry about it. If your boss turns out to be a holy terror, change companies. Anything else? Well, thank you very much for listening.
Indulge you for just one more minute, I'd like to call up Roger Madriaga, who's chair of the Industrial Systems Engineering Advisory Board.
Hi. How are you?
Doing pretty good.
Yeah.
The Alumni Leadership Award. This award recognizes graduates of the Department of Industrial and Systems Engineering and the College of Engineering at the University of Florida that have achieved a distinguished record of leadership in his or her chosen profession or life's work, whether in the academic, corporate, entrepreneurial, nonprofit, government, or military sector, and performed outstanding service to the department, college, university, or profession. It is expected that the awardee is a person of such integrity, stature, demonstrated ability, and renown that the faculty, staff, students, and alumni of the Department of Industrial and Systems Engineering will take great pride and be inspired by his or her recognition. Paul?
Talking about me?
Yeah. Talking about you.
Okay.
I'd like to present to you the Alumni
Wow.
Leadership Award.
Very cool. Look at that.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you very much. That's the best looking award I ever have. I really like it. That's very cool. Very nice. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. That's nice. Thank you, Joe. I'm sorry I went so long. It was
Okay. Well, join us for a small reception outside.